I will introduce Jim Walton from LRN, and I'll hand it over to you to introduce the panel. Thank you.
Okay. Is the mic on? Can you hear me? Hi, everybody. Hope you had a good lunch and you're ready for a very informative afternoon. My name is Jim Walton, and I'm an ethics and compliance advisor with LRN Corporation. LRN is proud to be a sponsor of this event. We enjoy our partnership with Ethisphere, and we've sponsored conferences with them in different parts of the world over the past few years. And we always find it to be enjoyable and informative. LRN, in case you don't know, we're one of the leading providers of comprehensive ethics and compliance solutions. So we provide ethics and compliance education, communications tools, data analytics, as well as advisory services. So we could evaluate a program for effectiveness, ethics and compliance program effectiveness, as well as culture surveys to help you analyze your ethical culture. I'm really pleased to be here today with this distinguished panel. We had a great conversation a few weeks ago. And so going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves, talk about who you are, your role, also a little bit about the company, because I think it's always important for people to understand what the organization is about and kind of relate that to what they're talking about in terms of ethics and compliance. And then I think it was Tosin who said that she had gotten into ethics and compliance by accident. And I think a lot of us can relate to that. So I thought it would be interesting to hear from each of the panelists in the introduction how they came to be part of this ethics and compliance community. So, Tosin.
Hello everyone, my name is Tosin Omokoro, and I'm part of Stryker's European Ethics and Compliance team. For those of you who don't know who Stryker are, Stryker is a medical technology company headquartered in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Originally, it was an orthopedic implant company. So Dr. Homer Stryker was an orthopedic surgeon who decided that the tools that he had available to him weren't appropriate, so he decided to make his own, and it grew from there. So over the years, we've now branched into surgical tools, beds, stretchers, and most recently, we've purchased a company called Physio Control, who do AED, so it's quite a broad area now. So I mentioned I'm part of the European compliance team. My background is actually clinical research, so I actually got involved in compliance, again, by accident, in around 2010, where the medtech industry was focusing a lot on its customer interactions due to some whistleblower activity in the US. They were looking at parts of the company who had heavy customer interactions, and of course, the clinical research team did just that. So I was given a project for 18 months to look at our customer engagement as part of the research team, looking at what we did in terms of selecting research partners, due diligence and onboarding them. And I developed we call them our clinical contracts team, who are then responsible for partnering with the legal and compliance team to ensure we had appropriate policies in place to onboard clinicians for research activities. So I managed that team for about 2 years and really enjoyed the value that I thought I added to the organization, being part of the compliance process. So then moved into compliance about 5 years ago. So now I'm responsible for the UK and Ireland compliance program. It's quite different in terms of the UK activity is mainly sales and marketing. So of course the program's focused on anti-bribery and anti-corruption. But in Ireland we have a lot of R&D and manufacturing. So there's a slightly different focus of the compliance program. So one of the changes that we're having to respond to as part of the Stryker Ethics and Compliance team is the growth of the organisation, and that is both organic growth as well as a growth through M&A. So the challenge we're facing is maintaining a consistently effective compliance program. So what we're having to really focus much more on than in the past is reinforcing the principles and the values around the program rather than just the rules. Because quite frankly, we're unable to identify all the risks as quickly as we're growing. So our hope is by engaging employees around values and principles, we can connect them to the corporation mission and values and also their own personal mission and values, and try and really try to motivate self-policing and self-governance. Saying that, we still do have compliance professionals based within each business unit who are able to provide clear guidance and rules around known risks. But our focus much more on values and principles is really helping to guide employees when they encounter unknown risks.
Hello, am I on? Great. Hi, everyone. My name's Jermaine Hooker. I am the Head of Ethics and Integrity for Europe and Operations at a company called LivaNova. We're also a medical device manufacturer. So our products fall into broadly two categories. Products, implantable devices, and extracorporeal support for cardiac surgery. And then on the other side, we have implantable devices for VNS therapy. So devices that stimulate the vagus nerve to treat conditions like treatment-resistant epilepsy and drug-resistant depression. So quite a range of products. We're a global company, so we have quite a huge footprint. As I've said, I look after our European region and also operations. And I have an equivalent that looks after the US and international. Prior to joining LivaNova, I was senior counsel at a company called BAE Systems, which is defence and aerospace manufacturer. So quite a different role, but very much focusing on similar risk areas, which is essentially third-party risks and interactions with government officials, how we manage the various different conflicts of interest that arise from the relationships that we have with those government officials. Before that, I was in private practice. I started my career as a commercial litigator, so I am a lawyer by background. So looking forward to the discussion today. We've got lots of really interesting ideas about how we can develop our compliance and ethics and integrity programs to kind of match the new trends that we're seeing. Looking forward to some very interesting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Is that on? Yeah. I'm Claire Handley. I'm Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer for JLL. For those of you who've not heard of our company, we are one of the leading real estate professional services companies. We operate in over 80 countries around the world, and we have over 90,000 employees. As a company, we have had, in a similar way to my colleagues, we've experienced quite significant growth over recent years, mostly through M&A. And managing the compliance function, I think one of our challenges is always making sure that we remain aligned and connected to our business lines, and that when we bring new groups of employees into the company, they take on our culture of ethics and compliance, and they really understand what it means to be part of JLL rather than part of their previous business. That's always one of the challenges that we have to face. The service lines that we provide are very varied. So we have our commercial real estate brokers. They all think they're rock stars, and they do the big office deals around the world. At another level, we have shopping center managers. We have mobile engineers who drive around fixing air conditioning units. And sort of when you sort of spread that diverse population of employee type with all the different jurisdictions and cultures we operate in, I think it's very clear that trying to maintain a sort of rules-based approach to compliance is never really going to work with our population. And so we're really trying to focus on a values-based approach. It's always evolving. It's always going to be a challenge. That's really where we're trying to aim to at the moment. So that's it.
Thank you very much, Claire. So we're going to start the session by focusing on, kind of at a high level, on the structure of the ethics and compliance program, where it sits within the organization, who it reports to, what kind of resources you have, to the extent that it is centralized or decentralized or a combination of those. I came into the ethics and compliance field in 2002 in the post-Enron wave, when corporations started to realize that they needed a separate ethics and compliance function. And we've been having this kind of debate and discussion really for the past few decades about how we should be structured, how we should be faced vis-a-vis legal. So why don't we start with Claire? You can talk about how the program structure has evolved over time, where you are today and where you see it headed.
Sure. JLL has moved very much, and we're in the middle of a global transformation today. So when I joined the firm, the global compliance function was really a team of one, and we were very decentralized and very reliant on local legal teams to perform sort of dual-hatted roles. Over the last 5 years, the function has really evolved, and that's sort of culminated this year in our move to globalize our legal and compliance function. We are now one legal compliance and risk team. We're very much part of our legal team. We don't operate separately, but we do have quite a large number now of dedicated compliance and ethics subject matter experts. I think one of the challenges that we've really been tackling here is how we integrate within our business, because clearly, nobody can have, no one ever feels like they have enough resources, and you certainly cannot expect to have people on the ground, in every operation, in every business unit. And so our focus has been very much to try to integrate with the business, to try to bring the business along with us. As part of that, we have developed a program, which we call our Ethics Liaisons program, where we've tried to take people who work in the business, it's their day-to-day job, and really give them the tools and the training and resources to help support them so that they can be our people on the ground outside of our function. So they do an annual training, they get a certification if they run through the program. We run newsletters, and in those newsletters, we're not really trying to tell them what our policies are, etc. The focus is very much, these are things that you can use in your day-to-day. You can share these with your colleagues. We give them sort of short video clips, maybe 1 minute, 2 minute clips that they can put in their own newsletters. And I think in that way, we're trying to operationalize a lot of our ethical culture. One of the changes which I have seen, I started life as a real estate lawyer. Sorry, I forgot to mention that previously, how I'd got into compliance. And then in 2001, I moved to a private equity firm and took on the compliance role there. And it was very much a rule-based approach that we adopted. It was a small private equity regulated business. When I moved to JLL 7 years ago, the focus was very much on ethics. They had a very strong ethics program. And that was fairly new to me, I'll be honest, but they've always had a strong partnership with Ethisphere, and I think that approach of a values-based compliance program has really made the difference to how effective the program can be, and the focus on teaching people why they need to do the right thing rather than what the rules are. I think maybe it's just our industry, but particularly our sort of salespeople, our brokers, rules really are there, their focus is not on rules. They're not going to sit and read our policies. And so for us, getting those messages across to our business in a way that says, these are our principles, these are our core values, and this is why you need to do the right thing. Is really the approach we've tried to take.
Thank you. Jermaine?
Thank you. So we at LivaNova have seen a huge change in our approach to what we now call ethics and integrity. Our function used to be called compliance, and that changed in January. And just to give you a little bit of background, LivaNova is a relatively young company, so it's the result of a merger of two different companies, which is 3.5 years old. And when those two companies merged, as you can imagine, we had very disparate compliance cultures and two different sides of the coin that just weren't aligned. So our job at that stage was to design, first of all, a global program, and then, for me, implement that in Europe. And so we were very focused on making sure that we had taken into consideration all of the requirements of the dreaded Department of Justice guidance on what constitutes an effective compliance program, blah. So we did that, and we focused on that, and we've got that. We've got a very strong program on paper. But what we're now starting to realise, and the shift that we've really had, and I think I've not heard that many other people talking about this, but we've started to realise that that on its own isn't enough. And we're really focusing on understanding the behavioural element of implementing a compliance programme or an ethics and integrity programme, and looking at what drives people to make the decisions that they make, what their motivations are, why they choose to do one thing versus another, and also how people learn and how they retain information. And so we've done a lot of training on behavioural economics and behavioural science in order to try and implement that and consider that when we're implementing our program. And actually, if you look at the latest guidance from the Department of Justice, which I think came out in April, May time, what they've said now is that actually all of that stuff that we said before about the effective components of a compliance program, that's fine, and you still need to do that. But what you also need to look at is whether your program is properly designed and whether it works in practice. And the kind of realisation that we're slowly getting to is that if you design a compliance programme or an ethics and integrity framework without consideration of any of those behavioural elements, you're kind of only halfway there, if that. And so we're really focusing on principles that can be learned from behavioural science. So lessons that marketeers and advertisers primarily work on when you think about how they sell their products. And our mindset has shifted slightly in terms of thinking of ourselves as salespeople and marketeers and trying to sell our products to the business, our clients, essentially, and thinking about, okay, well, if you want to sell a handbag or if you want to sell a car, what are the things that make people want to have that? And if you apply those principles to your ethics program, what are the things that are going to make people actually want to do this? Because ultimately, that's what's going to change behaviour. So we've seen a real shift in that, and it's early days, I think, for anybody taking that approach, but what we've started to realise over the past few months is that if you completely ignore that behavioural element, your programme is only ever going to be part way there, and it's not something that I think we're used to thinking about as lawyers and compliance professionals generally. So,
thanks, Jermaine. I'm fascinated by that because a lot of what we do at LRN is focused on behavior and what is it that makes people do the things that they do and how do they retain information. I'm just curious, where did the impetus from that come from within your company? Because it's a pretty, it's pretty fascinating.
It's a good question. So we had a new boss join us in January at the beginning of the year, and he is big on behavioural economics and behavioural science. And honestly, the first time we ever heard him talk about it, we all thought he'd completely lost the plot, because he's evangelical about it, and he's much further ahead than any of us are. And he came in with all of these big ideas about how we needed to be thinking about this, and the type of training that we need to be going to shouldn't be the usual compliance training. We need to start thinking like marketeers and advertisers. And we all just thought, what is this guy talking about? But gradually it's starting to make sense. And gradually it takes a while to get there. But there are certain lessons that and certain principles that we're gradually managing to embed into our program and starting to implement it in the way we roll things out. And so it's primarily him that's kind of done that, and he's given us all our own separate tasks on how, to come back with ideas on how we can bring it into the program. And so for example, I've recently been to a conference called Nudge Stock. I don't know if anybody's heard of that, but it's behavioural science and behavioural economics. And we were the only lawyers/compliance professionals in a conference of about 300 people. So it is primarily marketers and advertisers. But when you think about what they're saying trying to sell a product this way is not going to work because people make their decisions based on X, Y, and Z. And so you can really pull that out and apply it to your compliance program. And as I've said, it doesn't come naturally. You have to kind of train yourself to get yourself around to that way of thinking. But it's been an interesting lesson. And going back to the discussion we were having on whether you have a principles-based program or a rules-based program, this has been a really interesting lesson for us because, again, if you think about human behaviour, the way you respond to an ethics and integrity program is going to be very, very different depending on whether you're rules-based or whether you're principles-based. And I don't know if anybody has ever heard of an online questionnaire called Moral DNA. It's quite a new thing, but it's a test you can do online that puts you into one of 6 different behavioural categories, and it ranges from the more rules-based to the more principles-based. And we did it within our team, and probably unsurprisingly, most of the people in the ethics and integrity team are rules-based people. If you think about that behavioural science question and what that means for your business, if you've got a group of rules-based people designing your compliance program, the likelihood is that actually most of the people you're designing it for are probably principles-based, or at least a combination of both. So even getting that kind of understanding of where you're going to fail at the first hurdle, if you're all rules-based and designing your program based on us all being rules-based and everybody that needs to use it is principles-based, then already you're alienating a significant group of your people. So we kind of started from there, and then gradually it's got madder and madder. And I'm not going to talk about everything we've done because you'll think we're all mad, but we are kind of moving towards that direction for our program.
You'll have to send me that link. I'm very interested in that. The other day, my daughter and I were walking to an event, and she starts to walk across the street where there's no crosswalk, and I just blocked her, and then we walked up. There were no cars coming, but I walked down one crosswalk and then the other crosswalk. She said, "Dad, is there a rule that you wouldn't follow?" So I think I know where I would score on that one. So, Tosin, I know when we spoke last, you had talked about the E&C Champions program that you had instituted, and Claire was talking about the Liaisons program. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that and how that was implemented and where you are with that and what the success has been.
Yeah, sure. Again, just to reiterate, I think most of us in legal and compliance are used to rules and aren't often as creative as we could be. We've recently developed a COE team within the compliance team, so Centre of Excellence, and we have a training and communications expert, and part of her role is to provide us with, really innovative and engaging training that can really engage people more than the traditional compliance and ethics training. We also have worked on trying to, people are very used to hearing about kind of the disciplinary action following an investigation or a failure, and again, trying to rebrand ethics and compliance as being, a positive part of the business. Our focusing more on the carrot approach, we have developed what we call our compliance champions within the business, and it's really just recognising people that have made a positive contribution towards the compliance program. What we usually do is I would usually suggest somebody that I'm aware of, discuss it amongst the leadership team and agree on that, and during one of our town halls, the MD will recognise that person, they get a reward, and it just reinforces that we rather than just speaking about compliance, we actually reward it and recognise it as well. And people like to be recognised, and I think it helps to give compliance and ethics a different face within the organisation. I really like to rebrand compliance.
Fantastic. So building on that, in terms of working with other organizations within your company and getting them to be part of the team, maybe Claire, you could kind of talk about some of those organizations that you've partnered with and how that's been working for you.
Sure. I think one of the ways, and this, I suppose, I had never thought about it in this context, but does relate to behavioral economics. we have quite a large broker population, and they're very sales-driven. I think salespeople are the same in any organization. It doesn't matter whether it's real estate or anything. And they are quite challenging sometimes to connect with and to really engage, because they have far more important things to do out there than thinking about ethics or compliance. So we have a very limited window, but one of the ways that we have really tried to sell ourselves, and I suppose in a way it is that behavioral economics piece, is to really focus on what their clients are asking of them in relation to ethics and compliance. And it is becoming easier and easier because a lot of our clients are large multinationals. They're all under the same regulatory regime. They're all concerned about the same core issues, and they want to make sure that in their supply chain, their suppliers are also complying with the rules, have the proper programs in place. And so one of the ways we've really tried to connect with the business is to be that support in their sales process. So we support them, we make sure that they can demonstrate to their clients that we have, strong processes in place for, whether it's bribery and corruption, whether it's data privacy, whether it's modern slavery. And in that way, we're seen as supporting their bidding process, which at the end of the day empowers them. They can use it as a differentiator. And we still have a long way to go, but that's certainly one of the effective ways, one of the more effective ways we've found to partner with one part of our business. I've already mentioned the sort of ethics liaisons that we use as well, I would say at the coalface within our client account teams. We've tried to really connect with individuals who become our ethics champions, to be that sort of signpost and really point people in the right direction, so that we're trying to identify someone in an account, so when they have any questions, they can just turn to the guy next door. They're not having to reach up to ethics and compliance. And I say reach up to, not because I feel that's what I want people to think, but I am aware that even today we still have a long way to go to sort of feel that we are really in the business. It's where I want to be. But at the end of the day, I also recognize that it's easier for someone just to talk to the guy next door than it is to reach out to a lawyer. So that's one of the things we've really relied on as well. I think over the last few years, one of my sort of new best friends are our IT team, and engaging with our technology team has really helped embed and integrate our compliance functions. And people talked about it in the sessions earlier this morning. But the importance of trying to build our processes so they happen behind the scenes within our technology. So building in our client due diligence processes into our CRM systems, so that our brokers aren't particularly aware that these things are happening. They only realize this if there's a red flag and someone has to reach out to them. But otherwise, those processes happen through the systems that they're working in, rather than having a separate compliance system. So IT and digital are really, I would say, one of our biggest partners that we work with today in the office.
Okay, great. The point about selling yourselves and putting ethics and compliance out as a differentiator. I'm always struck with being an ethics and compliance service provider. Whenever there's a particular scandal with a particular company, whether it's a large bank or a large automaker or a ride-sharing service, and I'll let you all use your imaginations who I'm talking about, the instinct is always, well, let's go and help them be better. And my thought was, well, why don't we go to their competitors and sell ethics and compliance as a differentiator and say, well, we're the ethical ride-sharing service. We're the ethical bank. We're the ethical automaker. So, and I know that, Jermaine, we had spoken a little bit about, your ideas about making ethics and compliance as a market differentiator for a competitive advantage at your company. So I would like you to expand on that a little
Yeah,
bit.
absolutely. So we have, ever since we've rebranded from compliance to ethics and integrity at the beginning of the year, we've done a lot of work to try and change the way that people view the function. And I think a big problem with the way we were doing things before, and even just the name of the function, it automatically creates this kind of barrier. Nobody wants to do compliance. You do it because you have to, and it's foisted on you, and you've got mandatory compliance training, and it's awful. It's awful for everyone. It's horrible for you having to deliver it, seeing how much people dread you coming into the room. People hate doing the training. If you call it ethics and integrity, people want to see themselves as being ethical. Nobody wants to think of themselves as unethical or as not having integrity. So that, even as just at its simplest, as a really simple thing, is automatically kind of a switch in your head that kind of changes how we're seen as a function. Another thing that we did, again, to change the way people saw us in the function was we've always had newsletters that we send out, and we cover a different topic every month, and it's quite preachy, and it's another lesson of what you have to do. And when we had our new boss come in January, he looked at it and he basically said, it sucks. You guys are going to have to change this. It's really boring. Be a human person for once. Take yourself out of your compliance shoes and imagine yourself as just a normal person at home reading this. It feels like you're being preached to and like you're being told off. So let's change the tone of it. And one of the first things that he made us do is, and I hated this, I absolutely hated it, but he made us all, with each newsletter, a new member of the team had to reintroduce themselves, but not a professional introduction, a personal introduction. And we all had to choose a photo that was representative of our personal life, something that we like to do in our personal lives, and write a short bio that summarised us as a person, so kind of breaking down that barrier of, God, another lawyer in a suit or whoever you are sitting in your ivory tower in head office. And the photo he made me choose, and bearing in mind that I've never done any social media, so putting any kind of personal information about myself up was just, the idea of it was awful for me. But he chose a picture from a music festival where I had glitter all over my face and my hair dyed a different colour. My colleague Mel, who's over there in the audience, was made to send a photo of herself, sorry Mel, in a unicorn onesie at the gym, and just try and humanise the function a little bit, because again, I keep banging on about behavioural economics and behavioural science, but people respond so much more to that if they can see an actual person, and they're not being preached to, you're being spoken to on the same level. They can see that you're just, a normal individual like they are, and that kind of changes it. So that was kind of the first step of the rebrand. I've lost track of whether that was the question you actually asked me. Sorry.
No, but that was a great answer. So for Tosin at Stryker, have there been ways that you've used ethics and compliance to differentiate yourselves from your competitors? And do you have any examples of that?
We certainly have, and I think I mentioned earlier in terms of just introducing different skill sets within the team. So we're now looking, obviously, legal, risk, finance will always be the core of compliance, but just introduce people who are good at communication and marketing, so we can, of course, highlight to the business that the legal and compliance team's program or agenda is actually part of the business mission and values as well. So we have changed our language as well, and we're trying to highlight, actually, you can be proud to be part of a company who's ethical. There's a quote paper that I often quote, it's called Designing Trustworthy Organizations by Hurley et al. And that really highlights the fact that companies that are committed to ethics and integrity are overall high performing, and they call out things like lower employee turnover, lower customer turnover, lower monitoring costs, and better financial results. So we highlight to our employees at onboarding and other stakeholders that our commitment to ethics and integrity is really there's tangible benefits to that as well. So again, we try to again, just moving away from us being the police or the governors. It's really a benefit. And I think there are some long-term positive things to being involved with a company that's very committed to ethics.
Great. So we've put out a lot of good information from our panelists, and I'm sure there must be some questions or thoughts swirling around in people's minds. So just to make sure that everybody's still awake after lunch, maybe we'll throw it out to the audience here.
Hi, Johnny Beattie from S&C Lavalin. A question around sort of ethics liaison programs, champions, and those sort of elements. Have you ever had any challenges from maybe the rest of the business that you're choosing a select part of the business who you're providing additional information to or training? The thought being integrity and ethics and compliance is important for the entire business. Why are you focusing on a specific part and giving them additional training?
I mean, certainly from the compliance champions perspective, we purposely seek individuals from across the business. So we've had sales champions, we've had those in operations. So we're trying to highlight that no matter where you sit within the organisation, you can play a positive part towards the compliance programme. So we actually seek different examples from throughout the business.
I would say we have the same approach. I think we've had varying levels of success across different parts of the business. And I think that does reflect to an extent those parts of the business which are very client-facing and have clients who are focusing a lot on ethics and compliance. The population, our employees who work for them seem to be more engaged. We are trying to connect across all of our employee population. And we've also set up some other groups that focus on, for example, we've got privacy champions, and compliance champions. So we're trying to sort of diversify the groups to attract different interests. Our Australian team have also just set up modern slavery champions. It's the wrong word. We're still trying to work out what we're actually calling that group. We have to find something catchy, but not modern slavery champions. And they have new legislation, and that is really attracting a broad range of people in that jurisdiction. But I think one of our challenges, and I don't have an answer today, is getting people to engage across all of our different service lines. It seems to attract certain service lines, and I'd be really interested to apply more of Jermaine's behavioural psychology to understand how I can reach out better to different populations in our group.
So we've taken a slightly different approach in that we don't have, we're thinking about it, but at the moment we don't have a compliance or ethics champions program, but what we do have are people in each part of the business who have demonstrated a willingness to go above and beyond, and we try and recognise them and make sure that their contribution is highlighted, and we make a fuss about that. And for the minute, I quite like doing it that way because it encourages people to take the initiative, to take the lead on that side of things, and also rewards them for doing that. I think in due course I probably will need to do something like that because I look after the whole of Europe and operations on my own, so I can't be everywhere all the time. But at the moment, the way I'm doing it is to kind of focus on the people that are taking the lead themselves in leading the programme.
And so what we found also, as we've recognised people more and more, we are seeing more examples from across the business. So we're actually seeing people doing things from different parts. So actually it's worked out as a bit of promotional marketing in itself.
Okay, I saw a lot more hands before.
Hi, my name's Rosamond Brown. I'm from Infosys. I actually have two questions. The first one for Claire and the second one for Jermaine. So for Claire, your comments around the sales team really kind of resonate with some of the challenges that we have. And you mentioned some of your sort of tricks of the trade in terms of trying to kind of engage with them. I just wondered if you had any other ideas or could
I've got
add
loads.
to them.
I've got so many. So right, let me try and think of a couple of the principles that we've worked on recently. So a really interesting principle from behavioural economics is something called social proof. And what social proof says is that people respond more to information or data or being pushed in a certain direction if the examples they're given look like them. So one of the ways we've implemented that into our programme is, for example, when we're trying to get people to complete their annual online training on time, rather than saying, I don't know, 50% of the whole company have completed within the first week, we bring it down and say 50% of the French organisation. And countries like France really respond to that because of the culture. If you bring it down to what people can see in themselves, that really, really works. And it also has the added advantage of creating competition, because if you do it by country, people are like, okay, well, everyone around me, 50% of the people in my office have done it, so that pushes them to do it faster. And then the leaders of that team look at what other countries are doing as well, so it has a double kind of impact. So it's that kind of thing. We've looked at loads of different things. Let me try and think of another one. The principle of reciprocity, for example. So if you can demonstrate that you've managed to help out another function, if I give a recent example, we've managed to help out our internal audit function by linking them up with actually data that came from finance. We've noticed certain patterns in the data that we got from some of our finance programs that points at certain higher risk areas, and we provided that to the internal audit function and said, actually, when you're doing your audits, these are the types of areas you should be focusing on because our finance data points to those being the risk areas. And so we've linked those two people together. That was a really easy win for us. But what it does, if you're being sneaky, is it creates this, it's something called the principle of reciprocity, which means they now subconsciously feel a bit indebted to you. And the studies show that actually once you've done that one thing for them, it will take 3 or 4 things before they feel like it's evened out a bit. So it's those types of things that it's early days for us, we're still right at the beginning of it, especially me, it's brand new for me. But it's those types of principles, I could talk about it for ages, there's lots more, but it's things like that we're kind of gradually trying to sneak into our program to kind of manipulate people and get them to do what we want, essentially.
Just one of the things that we've used to help our sales team, and this was particularly around modern slavery, so where we'd had clients giving us very detailed RFPs, asking us a lot of questions about how we manage our supply chain. And one of the things with a company like ours, we have a huge supply chain because we're managing our clients' supply chain quite often. And therefore, something like modern slavery, we have a far higher risk compared to what you might think our business profile should be. And one of the things that we've tried to do, where we've recognized certain clients asking a lot of questions, we've reached out to the client separately and tried to create a best practice forum to go and discuss the issues, because with an issue, a compliance issue like modern slavery, everybody is working in the same direction. Everybody wants to try to eradicate modern slavery, and everybody recognizes that you cannot do it on your own. There has to be collaboration. And so what we've tried to do is build a bit more stickiness, as it were, between us as a compliance function and the client, by meeting with the client, discussing possible ways that we could tackle the issue together in the account. Outside of contract, really, it's more what could we do to improve things and improve the approach for modern slavery. Outside of the contract, we've ticked all those boxes, and we all recognise for something like modern slavery that the tick box compliance isn't necessarily making an awful lot of difference to the people on the ground who are the victims. And the feedback that's come back from the clients to our business accounts has, I think, helped us keep ethics and compliance generally in the conversation more, because we've demonstrated to an extent that we're providing that extra stickiness with the client. The client likes that. They feel that they're getting an extra benefit from it outside of the contract. And that's something that's helped for us.
Great, thanks. And just in terms of follow-up question, I'm sort of touching on the rebranding point that I think a number of you have mentioned. I mean, you've talked about newsletters, and obviously everyone does emails, everyone does videos. Are there any other particular kind of top tips that you have for everyone here today?
I think the the introduction of the term ethics in titles, and we're still working that within Stryker, is definitely important. You know, I was mentioning to my colleague there, you know, the word compliance kind of has negative connotations, kind of by nature. So I think, you know, talking about ethics, integrity, we consider ourselves an enabling function within Stryker. Things like that to kind of highlight we're there to provide support and enablement. Of course, when there's a no, but we're there to kind of highlight we are there to support. We have joint mission and goals as the organisation. So just really talking, using language that kind of re-emphasises that we are there to enable as well. So I feel that's really worked.
For us, it's a lot of what I've talked about already. A big change for us has been a focus on the human element and turning yourselves into people, and that's made a massive amount of change. And another small thing that we've done, which again, it's such a small thing, but it makes a huge difference, is at the beginning of every training or presentation that we do, start with a piece of information about yourself, something personal, something that makes you relatable to the people that you're talking to. And it sounds like such an obvious thing, but you can see the reaction, you can see the barriers go down as soon as people see that you're human and there's something that they can relate to. So that's a big thing. I mean, there's probably nobody else that will want to do this, but our boss is quite a disruptive person by nature, and so his approach has been make noise and shock people, and actually what that means is that you will get half of the people absolutely loving what you're doing and half of the people hating it. Both are good, because it stays in people's minds either way. What you don't want is people kind of on the fence and not that bothered about it. So do something different and dare to shock, and create ripples. And it's funny because we did a recent newsletter that we did, which was really controversial, focused on an investigation that we'd done relating to internal expense fraud. And we basically told the story, which was a ridiculous story that I probably shouldn't go into here. We told the story in our newsletter, and for the people that were involved in the issue, it was obvious that it was them. They would have known that it was about them. And we were all a bit like, are we sure we want to do this? And he said, absolutely, we want to do it, because people are either going to love it and say, finally, they're being open with us about what's happened, and the people that are doing things wrong, it's being highlighted, or they're going to hate it because they're scared that it's going to be them. But people will remember it. And unsurprisingly, we've had complaints about it, anonymous complaints come through our hotline. But that's kind of what we wanted, and it's an approach that might not be for everybody, but it means that people remember what you are and what you're saying, and it gets the message across. So that's kind of part of our rebrand, be controversial.
I can't say that I've got any sort of magic solutions to offer out there. Communication is always, I think, the hardest thing, one of the hardest things that we're challenged with, especially in our organisation. One thing that I haven't achieved yet, but I am trying to achieve, partnering with our talent development in HR, is to empower our ethics liaisons, our privacy champions, by putting KPIs into their performance reviews at the end of the year. Because it's not their day job, they're taking it on as an extra responsibility, and we're hoping that by actually giving them KPIs, it's not to make them do their job better, it's to help them demonstrate the value that they're adding to their managers. That's another thing that we're trying to do to sort of raise the profile of the people who are really stepping up within the organisation. But I can't say that I have any other sort of magic solution for communications. There's, as Jermaine said, some people love things like Yammer or other kind of instant messaging groups, and we have got an ethics Yammer group. Other people hate it. Other people feel like they're just drowning in emails. Some people like videos. Some people like cartoons. But you're never going to make everybody happy. However, I think, at the end of the day, we're trying to have a broad approach and just hoping that some of our messages are sticky. That's all we can aim for.
Okay, we got about 1.5 minutes, so.
Yashmin Golop, and I work for RB, and I am a ethics and compliance training manager. So training is what I do every day. RB, massive company, 40,000 employees, massive demographic. One of the biggest challenges that I face every single day is how do I communicate training to offline employees that don't have access to laptops, that don't have access to mobile phones? There are roughly about 10,000 employees that I still have to communicate to. There's still massive demographic. But how do I do that? Like, in your experience, do you have any amazing tips that you could share with me?
We have a similar problem. We have a large number of employees who never go into a JLL office. They work at client site. They don't have a JLL laptop, so getting training and messaging out to them is a real challenge. We do not have, the magic, answer to this today. I wish I did, and if you find one, I would love to hear. We have tried to do town halls and deliver training in that way, so client-based town halls, hiring venues near our client bases, all those kind of things. We try to push out messaging on mobile phones, but that isn't very easy. And we've had quite a lot of challenges. And I would love to throw this out to the audience, if anyone...
Yeah.
LRN actually has a tool for this very issue, and it's a combination of using employment tags, using terminal scenarios, using booths, and it collates the data in one place so that you can have it alongside your completions, just like anyone else would take training. I can talk to anyone about it on my soapbox.
We also utilise our managers, so we have the talent up top and we have the mood at the middle, and we also incentivise people managers to ensure they give a certain number of communications to their team within a year. We provide examples of topics that they can use for that, and then we also track that via we track that managers are given those messages, and we also encourage them to document who in their team attended that and what the message was. So we call it our mood in the middle communications, and that's a way of utilising managers to deliver the compliance training. So we give them the material, obviously provide support, but they're responsible for the delivery of the training. So that's a way of getting to those who aren't at the computers.
Great, thank you. Just like to thank everyone for your attention, for your great questions, and please join me in thanking our panel for being so generous and sharing all of their great ideas with us.
Thank you very much. One thing I realized I forgot to do when we came back from lunch is I promised I would give a bunch of stats related to all these topics. So now that you've heard that discussion, a couple data points that might be interesting. You look at the range of full-time employees in ethics and compliance programs, everyone can probably agree there's no one-size-fits-all, it's all over the map. So when you look at the world's most ethical companies, which are all large multi-billion-dollar multinational companies, the smallest team is 5 full-time employees, the largest is 134. So there's a couple large companies, we hear this a lot, where they say, hey, we don't have the resources of Microsoft. I know there's a lot of Microsoft people in the room, or Walmart or GE. And I think if you talk to them, they realize, hey, we'd like some more resources too. So it's all about getting creative. And then just a little bit on reporting structure. So 30% of chief compliance officers of WME companies report to the CEO. I think it's roughly 40% or so report to the general counsel. So that's kind of an interesting trend as well.